I'm gonna need you to say all that over again. No, I'm just kidding. Appreciate it, Oliver. All right, but what we're gonna be covering today, going ahead and jumping right in, really gonna be discussing, I don't know, what it was, part 3 or part 4 of our advanced series into underwriting. So we're really gonna be diving deep into the actual like income analysis, which I'm pretty excited about. And you know, sometimes underwriting can be kind of boring, but you know, we have to learn this one at some point, right? And this, to me, it's kind of exciting because you're actually getting to determine whether or not the deal makes any sense. I know it's Reggie's like favorite part about it all. So anyway, I'll let you guys take it away. And
well, I'm a nerd, so I'll just say that right up front. But it's kind of cool, guys, because you're actually taking this journey right along with us, whether you realize it or not, because we actually have a contract for this property sitting in our email box. And so this is part of our due diligence on this particular property. So I hope that excites people, because this isn't just like some hypothetical. We're actually looking at this. So it's real time. This is how we would do it. So Matt, hot potato, man.
All right, sounds good. All right, so like you said, last week we dove pretty in depth into the expense side of the house, talking individual items, whether it be insurance or marketing. Like we dove into individual items there, and I kind of just accepted Reggie's blanket statement of, hey, here's what we think the income could be. And so I'll jump back into the pro forma first today, the analyzer. We'll look at the income assumptions that he put there. We'll show you guys some of our other due diligence that we've come up today. I'll show you some data that Reggie compiled from the LoRa side of the house. Who remembers what LoRa stands for? Anyone?
Well, they must be on mute, because I know somebody knows.
Come on, someone guess at least.
Land use restricted agreement.
There we go.
There we go. Now, LoRa's not, like Reggie alluded to last week, LoRa will have other additional components to it. But in general, you'll hear a lot of people talk about LoRa properties. Okay, let's jump into this now. Share my screen. All right. So here's the analyzer we were in last week. Scenarios, if you guys remember some of the things that I was highlighting, we highlighted the insurance, we highlighted some of the taxes question, and some marketing stuff, as well as, landscaping, little things like that we caught. All right, we talked about working capital last week as well, but this week we're going to dive into this section for the most part, the initial target rent analysis. Okay, so this is really the kind of numbers we're going to dive into. So right now in this analyzer, you see what the current average is, and we'll verify this with Reggie. Has a much deeper analysis. I'll pull up here shortly to go over his numbers, and I'll jump into the analysis piece. Current rent numbers were $6.99 a door on average, and that's the way to simply state it, guys, because once you start talking about multiple units, like some are studios, some are 1 bedroom, some are 2 bedroom, some are 2 bedroom, with the additional room, like the larger 2 bedroom version, some have pool views, some don't have pool views. It's really tough to really compare apples to apples. So the quick way we really break this down is just the average per door across the board. But that really means nothing unless you really break down the numbers behind it. So today we're going to kind of break down the numbers behind it. So right now we're looking at an average of $6.99 per door, and we're going to try to verify if we collectively as a group think that $12.66 a door is a realistic expectation for target rent. Because if you remember, going back to our summary here for our actual P&L, $12.66 a door was our assumption for market rent for year 1, and then we kind of grew it over the first 3 years with a 3% analyzer to $13.43. So we'll see if this is a realistic conservative assumption over the next 3 years. Do we think we can get rents to $13.43? Or should we throw $12.66 here, or is $12.66 not even realistic? So anyways, just kind of build the picture for where we stand right now. All right, so what I'm gonna do first, we're gonna look big picture from what is possible from our current restrictions. Because I'd like to see, like, where is the line currently, So let's say we find out our restrictions are 900 a door and we're planning on 1200 per door. Like right away, we know it's not even possible. Like legally, we'd be breaking the rules. So first thing to know is like, what is our actual limit? So we'll kind of break it down. And this is what Reggie produced, which he called the income analysis overall. So Reggie, I reviewed it today, but since you created it, I'll let you kind of walk through it and I'll drive. I'll zoom in too so people can see a little bit better. But I'll start from the top here.
Yeah, so this is something that I actually pulled directly from the LURA. So there's the land use restriction agreement. It's a document that gets recorded with the deed. And so it also conveys if the property is sold. And so they actually they break down how you would determine what your max rent is per floor plan. And that gets updated every year. LURAs can be governed by different authorities. Like our one in Montgomery is governed by the Housing Finance Authority. This one happened to be regulated by the FDIC. Interestingly enough, I think back in the 80s or 90s, this governmental organization was formed. It was called the Resolution Trust Corporation. Basically, they came together to prevent this mass failure of banks. I know that sounds like awfully current, but this was like 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But the government formed them to prevent this mass bankruptcy of banks. They were getting ready to go insolvent. And if that were to happen, then it was going to cause this huge real estate crisis. And so they were the RTC, as they call it, was in charge of, I guess, trying to make sure they were governing things on the buy and sell side, and they got involved with some of the affordable housing stuff because that was part of the legislation. Anyway, a lot of boring background on it, but the RTC no longer exists, but it is still subject to the FDIC guidelines, and so there's even some more detail that we still got to look into that, or I'll say our attorney will, but this should give you a good kind of I guess good first exposure to it. Can you scroll down?
Yeah, do you want to go through the LURA first, I guess, just so you can see LURA, then we'll look at the numbers?
Yeah, so I actually highlighted the sections that I wanted to talk about a little bit. A lot of this is just it's boring legalese. They define some terms, but here, so there's you have to dig through these documents to pull out the important stuff, and so this right here tells you exactly what the LURA is telling you that you're restricted on. So there's some occupancy requirements, and the way that I interpreted this, and they have in this LURA, they've defined two classes of tenants: a lower income family and a very low income family. Or I'm sorry, there's low income units and very low income units. This tells us that no less than 35% of the units have to be dedicated. Total units have to be dedicated to a combination of the low and very low tenants. And this says, so no less than 20% of the units shall be available for occupancy by the very low income family. So those are two very important proportions right there that we have to pay attention to. So you can keep scrolling down.
Any questions on that one, guys, just to make sure that's clear before we go on? I know these are the boring legal documents that you think would be a non-factor, but these are the ones that'll bite you in the ass. Any questions on that portion?
Sure.
And
do you just get this with the broker, or did you go find them online? Where?
Usually, if a property is being marketed, the broker should have access to this. The seller should have access to this. But worst case scenario, if you really had to go dig this up yourself, if it was stuck in probate or something like that, then you would have to go down to the county clerk's office and request a copy of the deed, because it'll be right there. It'll be filed with the deed.
Yep.
Thanks.
Public records, basically.
Yeah. All right. So here's some more good stuff. So this talks about the rent that's charged by the owner for the qualifying units. And right here, it basically says that it shall not exceed the maximum rent for qualified tenants who are very low income families. And they define that. And it says such maximum rent shall not be greater than 30% of the adjusted income of a family whose income equals 50% of the area median income. Now I know that it's, you know, I'm sure somebody, within the government put this together, so take that into consideration. But basically what they're saying is they make $10,000 a year. All right. Then their rent can't be any more than 3,000 a year. Well, just
That's right,
the
10,000.
monthly income, 30% of the monthly income.
Mhm.
But anyway, you don't have to calculate this necessarily. They give you a lot of this data every year. The FDIC prints it out. I think that's actually one of the other docs I have in
Right
there, man.
here.
Oh, look at that. So this gives every county in every state. And so I just went down to Florida. It's on like page, 200 million.
Yeah, I was looking at my phone earlier. I'll pull it up. 1 second. One more.
But
page.
Reggie,
Yeah.
when you say it can't be more than 30%, if they're making $15,000, is that 30% for the year, which is only 4,500? Then you divide it by the 12 months, so the rent can't be more than $375.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
their monthly payment, 30% of their gross monthly income.
So does that take into account for inflation or no?
Yeah, that's
Well-
that's where this comes in.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. This
yeah,
is
so
for that rental area for that property area. Okay.
Yeah, and these are actually the newest numbers. They came out May 15th, and they come out once a year, and they do update them, and they incorporate inflation and even some of the local housing considerations. So there we go. There's Pensacola, Ferry Pass, and Brent, and this gives you the rent limits, the 50% rent limits for each floor plan. So I think this
sorry,
is
the studio is the first column, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, what we're looking at. I know I'm jacked up the whole thing.
Yeah, so this is basically the very low rents and the low rents. So you can see the efficiencies for the very lows are still at 696, and for this market, that's pretty good. And some of the current units are still below this. And then I think we have 1s and 2s, and so we still have meat on the bone when it comes to rent growth, even with some of the restrictions that are in place. Which, by the way, the LURA actually tells us that there's about 9 years left on it before we can terminate. So in 9 years, there will be another windfall because rents will likely have been suppressed further, or should I say they won't grow as fast as market rents will usually. And so we'll have this other big delta to capture then.
Yeah.
Okay, so and really this just talks about basically the same concept, but for the other tenant class. Now this says you can make a request to RTC for the schedule of maximum rents, but I just found it and downloaded it. It was on the FDIC website, and I'll have to admit I had to do a little digging because initially I thought this was similar to our Montgomery property, which is governed by the Housing Finance Authority, but it's not. So sometimes you just have to dig for this stuff. Let's see what's next. I know there's some other goodies buried in here. Oh, here we go. So this is where they actually tell you how to calculate some of this. And then so you basically use that document, that map pulled up that showed some of the rents for the floor plans, and then you can correct it for household size, or there's some adjustments that you can make. And they tell you how to do all that. And that's basically what I use to build the spreadsheet out. And so they give you the numbers, and these are probably pretty old. This LURA was signed in late 80s, early 90s, I think.
92, I think so.
Yeah, but they give you the framework. And so you can reverse engineer the calculation, what they did, and they tell you how to do it. And so you can kind of check your work, and gives you some confidence that you're, gonna do it right with the current numbers. And here's where I stole shamelessly that the structure you saw in the spreadsheet there to calculate those final monthly rents. See, they tell you how to calculate this. So it's not something that you have to figure out. I mean, I know a lot of people hated the word problems, in math back in school.
Yeah.
Like the bane of a lot of people's existence. Well, you don't have to worry about that because they give you the formula. So that's cool.
Yeah. But this is exactly what Paul was asking. So yeah, there's your exact answer for the formula to use.
All right, there may be one or two more little Easter eggs in here.
A plus B equals C squared.
Oh, there's. Yeah, and this is just for the very low income units. So above was the low income, this is for the very low. And I just tried to highlight some of the more important things, but obviously you would want to be familiar with the entire document.
So
Or at least,
yeah,
or have your attorney.
Before we move on to the actual spreadsheet with the numbers that depict our specific scenario, guys, any questions on the Laura or anything from the legalese side of the house at all?
So I was like, should I raise my hand? So this is for if we're buying a low, a property that qualifies for like a Section 8 or like tech or.
It's different. So there's different versions of affordable housing. There's multiple kinds of subsidies. And what I was talking about earlier with the Resolution Trust Company that was formed in like late 80s, early 90s to help kind of balance the real estate interest with the bank interest. That was a governmental effort. Now they did nestle some affordable housing nuggets in the legislation, which is where this came out of. And it's just survived this long, but it's different in the sense that Section 8, for example, is managed by the Department of what is it, the HUD governmental, yeah. And this is not governed by HUD. This is governed by the FDIC.
Okay.
So it's different. It's different in that respect.
So to answer your question, can you house Section 8 tenants in this property? The answer is yes, because they're completely they're separate. Like this is a restriction on the property itself. Doesn't mean we can't bring in a Section 8 tenant if we wanted to.
Okay, because they kind of qualify in regards to the income portion, right?
Yeah.
And so when the property is listed for sale, it should say, right, when the broker that's trying to sell this property, they have to list it as what was the word you use, affordable housing or
there's restrictions upon it.
This is a deed restriction, and so if they didn't mention it, that would be I would have a problem with that.
No, I'm saying is when the broker lists it for sale, they have to say, or is this something you had to dig out for every property just to make sure, calling a title agency and saying, hey, is there any deed restrictions? Is this considered affordable housing or something of that sorts?
Matt can probably talk to this a little more, but in general, I mean, it's buyer beware in a lot of places.
Oh,
and
wow.
so they're not, I guess, obligated to disclose, but this is something that will come up in a title search.
Okay.
There's a couple things that will apply here. First thing is the seller disclosure, which in our letter of intent in the contract itself, it's going to state that the seller is what's the word I'm looking for? Effectively, the seller's liable for anything that he didn't tell us that affects the value of the property. And so if this were to come out, let's say we bought this property and then we find out that there's restrictions and we can't execute the game plan that we had planned, we could totally come back and sue the seller for financial damages because of his restrictions. Now that would be part of our purchase agreement that we'd be able to sue him for.
Okay.
From the agent perspective, yeah, the agent should as part of their roles and responsibilities is to try to find out all the variables that materially affect the value of the property. And so they want all of those things to be disclosed, because again, the last thing you want to do is have everyone spend time and energy and effort, and then all of a sudden the day before closing something like this pops up, and now you've just wasted everyone's time. The benefit of real estate transactions is, in general, nobody really gets paid until a closing happens, and so people are generally pretty motivated to make closing happen.
Yeah, and Laura was land use restriction agreement. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can see that up here. So this one is February of '92 with this assignment, land use restriction agreement.
And they can come in many flavors too. It's not necessarily just restricted to affordable housing. Let's just say there could be any number of deed restrictions, and probably get pretty creative with it too. Have you ever seen any on the residential side, man?
there's deed restrictions for sure, not land use restriction in this regard, but there are plenty of deed restrictions. So there's some properties I've sold that aren't in HOA, but there's deed restrictions that restrict what you can build on there, what the type of property you can build and things. So that when they developed that specific area, they didn't want to establish an HOA, but they did want to have it built in a certain way. So they'll have like deed restrictions in that regard. This is kind of similar in that sense. It's kind of strapped onto the deed, and if you don't realize it's there, you could buy something unknowingly. Cool. Anyways, so this is one of those things, guys. These are the documents that, like I said, seem boring, seem relatively vanilla. You're like, oh, this is 92. How does this affect me 31 years later? Like, what the hell? Yeah, these things can come back and bite you. So the other thing to be aware of from this pure tech and logistics side, you can see like you can't select any of this text, right? This is not a control F-able document. And millennials and Gen Zs, when you can't just do control F and then search for a word, their mind tends to explode. So there are tools you can do what's called OCR. If you guys have not done that before, it's optical character recognition. So you could put this into like, if you have like, if I were to open this in my normal Adobe, it'll give me the option to scan it and convert all of this text into other text. So I could do my control F if I wanted to. So just little hacks like that could help you out if you guys are trying to find specific terminology when you're reviewing these. I will say not all OCR works perfectly though. So don't rely 100%. If you are trying to take an old document and use optical character recognition to do some sort of control Fing, then just realize it's not always 100%. So back yourself up by actually reading the document. Call me crazy.
Control Fing.
Control Fing. That's probably in Google's definition. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Okay, cool. So that's the LAWRA, guys. Understand deed restrictions there, LAWRA, FDIC, how we came up with these are our ceilings, right? So now we understand per the agreement, we know we have a certain percentage of low income, and we have a certain percentage of very low income housing that we have to house. And then beyond that, we're pretty much unrestricted for what we're allowed to rent. So now I'm going to pull up Reggie's income analyzer that we'll kind of review from there.
Okay, so this is my shameless plagiarism from the LAWRA document, and I just updated it with the 2023 numbers from the other document that I pulled from the FDIC site. And this gives me a maximum monthly rent for the lower income units, and it gives me the maximum monthly rent for the very low income units. So you can see for the efficiencies, where we're sitting at 911, that 1 bedrooms, 1044, 12 beds, 1175. And then similarly for the very low, we're looking at around $700, $800, $900. And it gives you some of those lower, it gives you the income limits, and there's due diligence that you have to, or we will have to undergo to, I guess, qualify tenants and confirm their income, because you can get in trouble if you don't. So anyway, that's kind of, that's where I started. It's like, okay, because they gave us, now we know what the max rents are on these units. We know that we can have no less than 35% total subsidized units, and no less than 20% of them have to be very low. And that's where I went next. And so I laid things out like this. This is a 90 unit, and I kind of showed the floor plan breakdown per property. And the one there in gray, the Villas of East Hill, it's actually in a much better part of town. It's that diamond, or what's the metaphor? It's the B class or the C class property in the A class neighborhood that every multifamily operator would love to get their hands on. And so just keep that in mind as we go forward, because that's going to play into what I think our strategy might look like. So I said, okay, first, what are the lower income rents for the floor plans that exist at these properties? And that's where I plugged them in here. Did the same thing with the very low income rents. And then I started, and this is where Matt got involved a little bit and helped out on the market rent. So when I went and looked, I looked at apartments.com, I looked at Zillow, I looked at our CoStar report, and based on the rent comps that are out there, and if you guys that remember, I like to differentiate between the market analysis and the competitive analysis. The competitive analysis was giving us rents that were in this range, and it also checked the median household income box. And so these are what I believe the market rents to be. Now, if you remember some of those numbers from up top, even the subsidized portion, like some of them aren't too far away from these numbers. And so that'll come into play a little bit later as well. So next we're gross potential rent. So this is today, if none of the units were subsidized and these market rents are legitimate, this is how much I think this is what the gross potential would be monthly of the property. So we're looking at about $113,000, $114,000. And I think there's like an average rent out there too. Yeah, so we're looking at an average of $1,266. And at a current average of 700, that's there's a lot of meat on the bone there. Next thing I did is I took the rent rolls and I said, okay, what are the current leased rents? So this is the sum of rents for each floor plan divided by the number of occupied units. If there were vacant units, I don't count those. And so this is what the leased rents were for each floor plan at each property. So they're pretty doggone low. And so if I look at the total leased rents, it's less than half of the gross potential rent. So just right off the bat, that's a pretty good sign. Now we have kind of the min and the max. We have our starting point and kind of like the best case scenario. And my next step was to say, okay, what would be the optimum mix? If we just maintain the minimum 35% of the units as subsidized, and we respected the proportions of the low and the very low income LURAs. And I said, okay, well, Villas of East Hill is in a great neighborhood. So, maybe we try to reposition that one and then we can allocate the subsidized units to Belmont and Villa Barcelona. And then I looked and I wanted to make sure that I maximized our rent. And so I chose the numbers that I chose for the number of units that were going to be dedicated to low income LURA, and they're shown here. So we basically have 32 subsidized units. 18 of them are very low, 14 of them are low. And then I just assumed everything else was market rents. And then this is what I would say our near term or today's gross potential rent. So what I've calculated above, that was without subsidies. This is with the subsidies. So I know a lot of numbers and I'm talking a lot. Is this making sense? Or does anybody have any questions before we go further?
No, I mean, for me, it makes sense. So you're just doing an average of all of them. And then I heard you say you're not including the vacancies, correct?
Yeah, when I calculate leased rents, so units that are currently occupied and have a lease in place.
He didn't want a $0 per month to
lower the averages.
Offset the mean. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and when we built the pro forma, I segregate loss to lease and vacancy losses. And so we have, for vacancy losses, we always want to assume that we can rent them out at market. And then the loss to lease, we're looking at the actual difference between potential rents and leased rents. And so that's why I kind of slice and dice it that way.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, because you have that total leased and then there was that gross leased. If you scroll up, because of that discrepancy though, do you go ahead and then say, okay, we're just going to do an average out of that then, because that's the gross potential, but maybe there's a reason why these total lease averages are so low.
So that's kind of a good segue when we jump into like, what is the market actually supporting right now? So like, it's very easy when you start getting into these spreadsheets. It's very easy to kind of lose the forest through the trees sometimes. And so all of a sudden you think you hit a gold mine because you got dug so deep in, you forget like, oh crap, I forgot that, this one building is, underwater, or like Reggie said, the location in real estate is huge, right? And sometimes data can be skewed one way or another, which we'll get into here in a second when we look at what we think the market can support. But that's a really good question, Paul, where you're like, is that realistic to assume that we can just double rents? And sometimes the answer is 100% yes. Yeah. And sometimes the answer is they are where they are for a reason, right? And we got to figure out what that reason is.
Maybe there's a lot of mom and pop owners. Yeah.
Mom and pop owners for sure. I mean, both of the first two mobile home and RV parks that I bought, they were mom and pop run, and they didn't raise rents for like 7 or 8 years, like literally they were just happy. They knew everyone in the place. It was the easy button, and they just kind of let it run, and the next thing you know, I was able to double the rents the moment I took over. Now, when you can't shock the system though. So it's not like we can walk in and all of a sudden say, all right, bitches, everyone's doubling rent tomorrow, and we expect everyone to stay, right? That's not the way it works. You got to come in with a plan. So like whenever I took over my second RV park and mobile home park, they're all on fixed income. So we chose to, over the course of 8 months, and we told them, hey, this is the plan. In 8 months from now, this is going to be what the lot rents are going to be and the RV rents are going to be. We're going to slowly get you there, guys. We're not going to try to rip a Band-Aid off here. We're going to slowly get you there. So $25 this month, $25 the next month, until we eventually got there.
Right. Okay, nice.
So yeah, that's a really great point though. So Reggie, great overview on that. Just one, before we kind of get off Reggie's, we're going to come back to these calculations here in a second, but does any questions at all on kind of how we got to these assumptions, guys? And there's no dumb questions here. All right, sounds good. All right, so next we're going to try to test the market. We're going to do everything we can to try to see effectively if we think a 1266 average on these units is a realistic average. So I'm going to break that down a little bit more granularly when we compare these to what Reggie was showing as market rent per unit, non-lower rent. So he was thinking $11.95 for a studio, $12.50 for a 1-bedroom, and then $1,400 for a 2-bedroom. So that's where the 1266 is derived. It's from these assumptions for what we can support on a studio, a 1-bedroom, and a 2-bedroom unit. Okay. All right. So just to give you guys one more kind of geographical representation of where we stand. Again, we're in the Panhandle here. Mobile, Alabama is over here. Destin, Florida, Panama City, and this is Pensacola, right in the kind of the armpit of Florida, if you will. From here, if you zoom in, where we stand within Pensacola itself, these are the 3 properties. There's West Chase down here. Here's Belmont, and this is the other one. It's called Lloyd Street, or the Villas of East Hill, or whatever. What was it called? Villas of something.
Yeah, Villas of East Hill.
Villas of East Hill. Yeah, so these are the 3 different properties. So this is the one that Reggie was saying is kind of the diamond in the rough. A little bit further out to the east, this one is. So just to give you an idea of where we stand. I'm showing you this because we're going to be looking at maps here in a second to understand kind of where rents are coming from and everything. The other thing to be aware of is we are right along a large body of water. And anytime you're investing near a large body of water, that large body of water tends to sway actual values of properties. It tends to sway rents. It tends to sway a lot of different things and have implications, right? If you were to buy a property near one of the Great Lakes, you better believe the properties that are on the lake are going to be more expensive than the ones that are 10 miles from the Great Lake, right? Does that make sense? So any large body of water generally is going to have a positive influence, except for maybe, I don't know, like the Great Salt Lake in Utah. I'm assuming you don't want to live on the Salt Lake, but I don't know. That's an assumption. Probably, I don't think I'd want to live there. I hear it stinks every once in a while. Okay. Anyways, so what I'm going to do, this is me having my real estate license and being in the area. One of the MLSs that I have access to, MLS, if you guys aren't aware, is the multiple listing service. It's the agent kind of database, is the Pensacola database here. And so what I like to do is I'll just run basically a rental search in the area. So this is going to be the most formalized data we can get. Now realize this is a residential real estate agent MLS is very good for finding comparable sales and finding value for traditional single family duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, residential sales. It is, we'll say, mediocre at best when it comes to rental comparisons or rental analysis, because most people don't necessarily list their properties through the MLS to get them rented. A lot of property managers will just throw them on apartments.com, they'll throw it on Zillow, they'll throw it on their own internal sites, they'll find people on Facebook Marketplace, they'll find people on Craigslist, and they'll do their own scouting to find people, versus having the centralized database. But what we'll do, we'll see what we can find. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull down any sort of active rentals that are there, and then we're going to pull any sort of pending rentals if there are any. And then we're going to look at the actual rented units. So this is the real-time data of what people actually rented the units for in the area. What we'll start with, just because of preponderance, just for time's sake, and it's already 7:12, preponderance of our data, if you guys remember, preponderance of our units here, we have 45 out of our, nope, 45 plus 5, what is this?
Oh, it's 58. That's just
Yeah.
45 at, or that's just 45 one beds.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the one bedroom. So we have
Oh,
68 out of our 90 units are one bedrooms, right? So right now I'm gonna spend most of my energy showing you guys how I kind of analyze a single bedroom. Like I said, we need to kind of look at it slice by slice. And so we'll look in just at the one bedrooms first, because that is a preponderance of the units we have. So I'm gonna look at just the one bedrooms here. And then as far as the dates, I only want to see things that have been rented, we'll say in the past 6 months. I don't really care if they were rented 2 years ago, because that was an entirely different market. So I'll say, let's look 6 months back, and then we're going to jump into a map, and we're going to try to do a quick search here. All right, so here we are in Pensacola. You guys remember the map where we are? There's ones up here in East Hill. There's a couple down over here in downtown. So then I'm just going to kind of draw a little search in this area to kind of grab the data. All right, cool. So take the general area here. So now we have all of the one bedroom data in this area. You'll see this is where one of our property is. So we have actually 7 listings from our property, which is kind of unique. We have a couple from our Belmont property that are actually in the MLS, and a couple from the Chase Street property as well. So we are in the system as well as some other comparables. So we'll just run the search, and I'll quickly go through kind of some of the data that I'm looking at when I'm doing this kind of comparable analysis. So the first thing I do is you see the status here. I'm sorry, this is small. I can't really make it bigger with the, well, maybe I can. Yeah, I can. So the status on the left-hand side, this shows rent, meaning these ones are actually rented. But if you scroll down, you'll see some of them that are active as well. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go sort by price. So I want to see what the cheapest ones have gone for, and you'll see the higher you go in price, or the lower you go in price here, these are the cheapest ones. These are all one bedroom properties. They've all been rented out, but as you get higher and higher and higher, you're going to start to see more active properties, which makes sense, right? People are trying to charge more, so they're generally going to be more active out there. So then we're going to try to just compare. So what I do typically, I'll go through it. I want to select just to get a visual representation of where our properties lie. So 1177 is the East Lloyd Street. That's the diamond in the rough, the property to the east there. And then I kind of just select the ones that I know that are our addresses. So here's another Lloyd Street one. Here's another Lloyd Street. We got another Lloyd Street. Another Lloyd Street. Here's a Chase Street one, and here's a Belmont one, and a Chase Street one, and a Belmont one. So all the ones that are highlighted in green are our properties. And I can see how they advertise, and I can see the most expensive one that we rented. It's $11.95. So when Reggie says, hey, I think we can get one bedroom properties to $12.50, I know we're in the right ballpark, at least, right? Because they've already shown that they can actually do it. They physically have already rented a property for almost $1,200 already. So do I think that's a realistic goal? Yeah, I think it's a realistic goal off the bat. But I will tell you, as I jump into here, you'll start to see things that can really skew your numbers. So again, these are sorted by price. And so as I'm going down, you'll quickly go from 1,200 to 1,300 to 1,700 to 2,000 to 2,300. You're like, holy crap, can I get 2,300 for my single bedroom condo or single bedroom apartment in Pensacola? Because this one was actually rented. And the answer is no, not for the ones we're buying. So you got to actually look at these pictures to compare what's being rented here. And the other thing you'll notice here, these are furnished, where most of these ones below the line, meaning that are more expensive than what the most expensive one that we rented, if you select through the listings, you'll see all of these are furnished. So these are furnished condos. So what most of these are, because Pensacola is a pretty heavy short-term rental area, Airbnb area, most people, if they don't want to deal with their Airbnb anymore, they'll just kind of throw it on long-term furnished rental to have a higher long-term, higher than normal long-term rental kind of stay. But this is also a potential exit strategy for us as well. So now that we know, hey, like furnished long-term rentals are going for an extra $200 to $300 a month, maybe we can go out there and maybe furnish a couple, and we can test the waters at a potential exit strategy to explore. Is it worth it to spend $5,000 to furnish a one-bedroom condo to get an extra $300 a month in rent? Maybe not, right? So we'll have to run those numbers. Okay, so what I did, I went through each one of these listings, and you'll see as I kind of click through them, I don't need to search it every time here. They're either brand new units that are more expensive, or they're furnished units that are furnished near the downtown area of Pensacola. So, another furnished one. This one comes with, is a larger apartment complex that has a pool in it as well. This one on Garden Street comes up often as a comp, but the unit itself is generally a little bit nicer than what we're offering here, with like an indoor pool and kind of some additional amenities, nicer flooring and stuff. But flooring is something we can easily update, but we can't easily add an indoor pool like that. All right, so that's what I compared as what do we think is realistic. So now I go back to the actual data. I say, okay, so for Lloyd Street here, which is the villas at East Hill, we've already shown that we got some at 1095, some at 1095, one at 1195. So do I think 1250 is in the realm of possibility? Yeah. I mean, I personally, me being a conservative dude, I'd like to say, hey, 1195 is our max, but I think we're justified in saying, hey, we could probably push it a little bit higher for what we would consider market rent. And then we drop it down to exactly what Reggie was alluding to before, of saying, hey, Chase Street and Belmont Street, they're clearly not demanding as high of rents, but what do we think we can realistically get them to? Do we think it's realistic to get 1,200 for Chase Street and Belmont Street? And my answer is maybe, right? Like that one's tougher to say. I don't want to say no, but I don't want to say yes either. And I didn't drive the properties yet, but I know Reggie did. So Reggie, you want to kind of give any more insight for the properties and areas?
Yeah, and so this just highlights one of the reasons why it's important to go look at the property and then have somebody there that knows about the property, because I was able to meet the maintenance guy that the owner personally employs, and he does all of the maintenance, all of the renovations, and they're actually renovating units as they turn. And so he walked me in one of the units, and they are of smaller floor plans. They have less square footage than a lot of the comps, but they're renovating to I would say a higher standard than this class of apartment usually dictates. And so they have like, butcher board countertops and, higher than contractor grade cabinets, that kind of thing. And so what they lacked in square footage, they're making up for in standards of and quality. So how it's important to our analysis here is because if you have an unrenovated unit going for $700-800, but then you have another unit that's renting out at $1,250, that may be why. Yeah. So just something to consider in the analysis.
The other thing I'll do, I'll look through these and I'll just see how they're currently advertising. If you go out here to Via Barcelona and you actually look at the real-time picture, I think half the letters have fallen off, right? Like from a marketing standpoint, from a street view standpoint, it's pretty terrible. And this is one that's probably pretty prime for what we did in Mobile at Brixton, to where we whitewashed the bricks. We kind of highlighted with a dark, so it was a lighter brick with like a darker blue, like some sort of really nice poppy accent from the outside perspective. We rebrand it with a different name, a little bit more of a modern name. And all of a sudden we were able to command much higher rents because we gave it that curb appeal and a little bit more pride of ownership, but pride of, residents wanting to live there. And then even looking at the way they're marketing it themselves, like pretty crappy pictures overall. This is the older kitchen style that Reggie was alluding to versus the newer ones they've updated them to. And then even, when you see like pictures that are just straight up sideways, like things like that you're like, okay, guys, like they clearly not a lot of energy went into marketing this. And so you get an idea. All right. So all that being said, I would rinse and repeat for the studios and for the 2 bedrooms to try to build myself a picture of what do I think is a realistic goal for that. So that's the MLS side. The next thing I'm going to do is kind of what Reggie alluded to. I said, all right, man, let's go to everyone's favorite website is Zillow, because Zillow actually has some pretty good data because everyone uses it, right? So I'm going to go to just search one of the properties. Let me get rid of this. So we'll go 220 West Belmont Street, Pensacola. That's definitely not it.
Oh, yeah.
$22.09. That's not what I want.
222. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. All right. So in Zillow, what you can see sometimes. So right now you see they have Zestimates here, but the Zestimates are not shown. So they're just showing like values of properties. Sometimes the owners, you can restrict it to where you don't show a Zestimate, a rentals estimate if you don't want to. So you can kind of actually restrict Zillow. But what you can do sometimes is, where is it? You can jump in here to see average trends though. So from there, you can click down to the bottom where it says average trends under their rental manager. And you can get an idea for, all right, let's say we're looking for a 1-bedroom in Pensacola, and we're looking for apartments, not a single family house. So they're saying 1-bedroom apartment is $1,565. Now, again, this goes down to understanding what's skewing the data here, because if we go back to what Zillow's actually, if we want to pretend we're a renter, now we're looking for things to rent so for rent in the Pensacola area, you'll see a lot of these, especially if we just go, I'll say use exact match. We want to just find a single 1-bedroom, at least 1 bathroom. You'll see some that are like 2,000. You're like, oh man, what's over here? Another furnished rental, right? So like a lot of these things are going to be like Airbnbs that are kind of skewing the numbers to be a little higher than they actually are for your traditional long-term rentals. When I went through almost all of these that weren't obviously rentals, almost all of them were like Airbnb styles. And the reason they're Airbnb is because downtown Pensacola is a highly sought after area to visit. So again, that bodes well for our properties, but it does skew the numbers a little bit. So just something to be aware of as we're kind of comparing these apples to apples here. So that's the next thing I would go to, and just get another gut check, another variable in your mix for when you're going to make this decision for what numbers you're going to put in your analyzer. The next thing I'm going to go to is rentometer, just to give one more variable here. Rentometer, I threw in 222 West Belmont Street. I threw in a rent of 900 just to see what it said, 1-bedroom, and said we were well low. And again, rentometer, I'm thinking the same thing. You see all these red properties that are downtown in the nicer area. These red properties are going to skew the numbers in a greater scale, just to get an idea there. But it's nice to see, it's comforting to see that they think it's going to be well below what we're considering. Now, I said 900, where we were thinking, we were saying 1,200, really?
1,250, I think, for the ones.
Yeah, so 1,250, you can see on the little thing, on the little gauge, we're still well in the green in the rentometer scale in the grand scheme of things there. And then I jumped into actually one of the ones that I prefer is the Bigger Pockets calculator. So Bigger Pockets, if you guys don't have a membership, it's free. I go to the tools and you go down to rent estimator. And then once you jump into the rent estimator here, you just type in the address. You can say it's a multiplex. I'm looking for 1-bedroom, 1-bath comparisons. And it tells us 1175, which I think personally is, we've seen 1195, what we had actually rented. So I think this is the most realistic number out there out of all the analyzers, at least. I think this does a good job of pulling it, but it also does tell you, hey, it's got low confidence because there's not a lot of comparables in the area. There's not a ton of multifamily around here compared to like a larger metro. All right, so all that to be said, now you're like, now you need to come to, like, this is where the rubber meets the road, where you need to finally come up with a decision for what are you going to put in these numbers. Now, for me personally, I'm 100% on board with Reggie saying villas at East Hill. I totally think 1,250 is a realistic number to say, hey, this is market rent. Do I think Belmont and Villa Barcelona or Villa Barcelona, however we're going to say it, is 1,250? Personally, no. I don't think we can get them as high. I think 1,100 in my mind is probably more of a realistic goal to hit here for the 1-bedrooms. Now that's just me, and we'll go back and forth internally with me, Josh, and Reggie for where we want to land with these numbers. And then ultimately, as you shift these numbers, luckily the way that Reggie built this, it's gonna give us the average rent as we update these. So it goes back to, if you build a solid framework for analyzing these numbers, that you can just manipulate one thing and then everything else it gets updated, it makes your life that much easier to kind of run the numbers in the end. So any questions on that, guys, before I kind of delve any more? I know we're going about an hour at this point. So what questions do you have about market analysis, pulling rents, comparables, anything there?
I'm with you.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. No questions.
All right. So from there, we would then jump into the actual pro forma. So this is ultimately when you say, hey, is this deal going to work or not? It's going to come down to, when do you refinance? Really big pictures. When you refinance, when do you refinance? What is your assumption for your monthly average? What is your vacancy assumption? What is your assumption for your operating expense ratio? And then from there, that's going to determine your NOI. So this is like an eye chart. I'll try to zoom in. I always forget some of you on phones and stuff. everything else kind of just adds or subtracts from those numbers, right? Ultimately, it comes down to, is this a realistic market number with this realistic vacancy factor? And then from there, is this NOI realistic based on this operating expense ratio? And it's just these couple variables. And so really, ultimately, the single number comes down to is this NOI going to support the refinance? So from here, this is where we can manipulate. I could say, hey, man, if I don't think 1266, and this is one of the cardinal rules, I try not to break this, but I'll show it now. I'll say 1200. I try not to overwrite this because it's formula and it'll jack things up. If I say, hey, no, I think market rent right now is 1200. So at the end of the day, we're going to get to 1273, assuming a 3% rent escalator over the next 3 years. Will that get us to a point? We're looking at 47% operating expense ratio, and knowing me, I'd want to see at least 50. That'll produce roughly a $700,000 NOI. Will that get us to a point that we can return 100% of member capital on the exit? And the answer is no. And so what Reggie and I and Josh are going to do, we're going to have to go back into the numbers and be like, hey, like, is this, what do we think? Is ROAR being way too unrealistic, way too conservative? Or, is this right? Is there some other expenses to consider? Or, so we'll jump back and forth to see, hey, like what is realistic? Or, do we need to go to year 3 or year 4? Like, we're still not hitting 100% at year 4, year 5, you're like, okay, 90%. And then you go back, this is still all based on a 7% cap rate, which we can argue cap rate, because cap rate is going to be a big variable there too. So this is going to be the internal argument that we're going to have between me, Josh, and Reggie about what is our final numbers. And the reason that makes such an important factor is because once you put a pin in your final numbers, this is what we base everything else off of, right? The investor deck, the way we talk about it when we're talking to lenders, like everything needs to be based off a single kind of target. And this is how we kind of back ourselves into that target. So ultimately it comes down to what NOI do we think we can hit by year 3? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, because that NOI is going to be derived from there, derived value. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, no, I was fixing my glasses. Sorry.
Oh, got it. Cool. So that's the big picture there. Reggie, Josh, what else do we want to throw in there as far as numbers or discussions?
I think there was one more little section on the spreadsheet.
For your spreadsheet?
I think so. I took that from a larger spreadsheet that I had on this, but okay, yeah. So if you keep going down, so at the bottom here is what is based on like how we sliced and diced the subsidized and the non-subsidized units. This number is actually what I believe the current potential, the gross potential rent is. And that's maximizing the number or maximizing the rent that comes off of the non-subsidized units and strategically placing the subsidized units. And so that's going to be somewhat less than the 1,200 number.
And so you would consider this to be current market rent.
Right. And because one of the things I showed above was if none of them were subsidized today, then that would be today's, that would be the gross potential rents today.
Yeah.
And so after I correct for the fact that, we have to implement, 32 of the 90 units, we have to dedicate those to subsidized units. If I optimize that, then I believe this is the highest that we can get.
Yeah, and so if we were to throw basically 1,100, right? Then we're just looking at it, 1111. So if we were to throw 1111 into our P&L as the first year's average, that grows us out to 1179 at year 3, assuming a 3% escalator each year. We're closer to that 50% operating expense ratio, which I like to see as well. That produces a 630,000 NOI, which at our exit strategy only gives us half of our money back. Which again, I think that's more realistic. I feel more comfortable assuming these lower numbers. So what other? I know we always talk perpetuity models, but we can talk what a traditional model might look like out of this as well, guys. And so what a traditional model might look, they might say, hey, we're not planning on doing a refinance. we're planning on just selling in year 7. And you can see what does that look like from an IRR perspective. You're only getting 11% IRR. Average cash on cash is 6%. You're like, that doesn't look very good. And you can kind of start to manipulate these to see, all right, do any of these worthwhile? You're like, not really. What if we refinance at year 4 and we sell at year 8? Like a lot of these, based on the current input we have, a lot of it's not very strong. So this is something, again, we'll need to talk about internally to see what else can we change. The other big variable that you can typically change is price, right? And so if we're running these numbers, again, we're not under contract yet on this one. We literally have a contract in here at hand that we could sign. But we could say, all right, like these numbers just aren't working for this. So let's see, what would that price have to be? 5.5 million, 550,000 would definitely work. And this is what I'll do sometimes. I'll just kind of I'll back it in. So let's get rid of this. Go to year 10, and we'll go to year 3, getting 75% in year 3 with that. And you start to just back it in. You're like, okay, what about 5 million? How does that one look? Get 90%. So roughly, 5 million is getting close. And then from here, it's probably going to be like 4.8.
The only thing I don't like about the Michael Blanc analyzer is when you start to manipulate purchase price, it affects your purchase cap, but there's also a formula tied to the sell cap, and so sometimes you have to take that into consideration and really determine if your cap rate makes sense.
Yeah, the biggest thing here is this. I generally only look at this area here when I'm doing the perpetuity model, because I know these other numbers can get jacked up. There is what kind of Reggie's alluding to if you kind of just manipulating single cells. So I care about, will I get, based on this NOI and this cap rate and this LTV, will I get 100% of member capital returned?
Yeah, because actually, Matt, I think, did you ever change the formula back on the pro forma?
No, I don't. Every time I've messed with it, it shouldn't change anything. That shouldn't affect anything, because it's pulling the NOI. The NOI is still 630, and that's what the assumption is here for the exit strategy is 630. But I mean, let me know if I'm wrong. Happy to admit it.
Whenever I added the purchase price, I've never seen it inadvertently affect anything negatively. At least from a cap rate perspective, it does affect your purchase cap, but the purchase cap isn't tied to the refi cap. At least in the exit strategy.
Purchase cap.
It may be in some.
Affect your purchase cap for sure, because it's all based on the price. Of course, it's going to affect your purchase cap.
Now,
yeah.
So we've got this new average monthly rent, but now since we've adjusted the gross potential rent, it's going to actually reduce the loss to lease. And so there will be some correction there, because the loss to lease calculation, I calculated the percentage and input it into the Michael Blanc analyzer on the scenario tab. And so that loss to lease will actually be somewhat less. Is that,
loss to lease for year 1 will definitely be somewhat less. I mean, I think assuming a 12% total vacancy, I think in year 3 is realistic, but that may affect, let's see if we just go 15 and 10, something like that. It shouldn't change anything now. That doesn't affect it, because ultimately it's just going off this NOI and the member capital in there.
Yeah, one of the things that will change is IRR and average cash.
100%. Yeah, without a doubt. These will shift. That's why I said I don't look at IRR average cash when I'm doing this. I want to make sure my goal is this, right? My goal is member capital being returned. And then, if we get 100%, if we hit 100% here, IRR is going to be through the roof. We know IRR is going to be good if we get 100% member capital return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only reason the average cash on cash return was like 90% was because there was only 4% of capital left after the refi.
Yeah, if we shift this to 4.7 million, I'm sure we get 100%, and then the numbers look real good. Exit strategies.
Yeah, see, 1,000%.
1,000% average cash on cash. Who wants to invest with us?
I do.
Yeah.
What was it that you just changed, Matt, that made it, jumped it to the 100? Because I was looking at.
That was me stepping down purchase price. So it was saying, okay,
Oh,
at this,
lower the purchase
we
price.
ran all of our numbers with the assumed purchase price, and with all the assumptions that we're kind of continually tweaking, we're like, all right, this looks good, this looks good, this looks good, but you don't know what you don't know what the cake looks like until you bake it and you pull out the oven, right? And so now we're waiting for that timer to go off, and we hit ding, and we're like, oh, well, the cake didn't look exactly like we expected it to, right? And so what you do, you go back to the baker, and this is me, do my quick reiterations of like, all right, what if we go a little bit lower in price? What does it look like? A little bit lower in price. And so we're kind of tweaking that recipe, if you will.
For sure.
Yeah, he's kind of doing like a real-time sensitivity analysis.
Yeah, that's all it is. All right, you guys were super collaborative today. Are you fixing your glasses, Paul? Or you raising your hand?
I've actually raised my hand this time.
Okay.
If you can go back to it, so
Yep.
on the projected, that projected is on the scenarios based. That projected is your year 3. Is that correct?
So no, this projected is one scenario. This is your quick way to determine where I think value could be down the road. This column, these 2 columns here, do not affect anything else in this analyzer.
Okay.
The only thing that affects everything else in the analyzer, if I change this to column 3, scenario 3, then the entire analyzer will be based off scenario 3.
Oh, okay, perfect.
But because we have scenario 4 selected, all of our numbers are based off the offer here, which is
Correct.
what we run.
Beautiful. Okay, it's just because I was running a scenario the other day, and I was changing the projected, and I'm like, wait, do I really need to? All I care about is the offer and making sure I get 100% of my
This
capital
is the
back.
quick way to give you like, all right, here's the glossy brochure, the marketing package, right?
Yep.
Here's what my version, I don't really use a ton, but you can use it for sure. Project is what do we think we can actually get this to? And we're basing our offer on this, so this is the one we generally work off of, is going to be scenario 4.
Because what I was doing was, if you go to that target rent analysis there to the right, I was using, okay, what obviously the current averages, and then I was saying, okay, the target, and so I was taking the target rent and then plugging it in that column 3. That's the reason why I was like, okay, is this what I'm trying to get it to get to? Okay, good. So yeah, I was good on marketing package and then offer. All right.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is kind of the quick way to do what we just did, right? You can get down and you can say, okay, what is my NOI? You get down to an NOI right now. This, like, your projected here is showing a $742,000 NOI. But if I throw in another $120,000 here, we get down to 622, which is roughly the NOI that we were at a 7%. At a 7% cap rate, we can see it's an $8 million valuation. When we go here, the exit strategy is going to be 8.8, roughly $9 million valuation. So you can do the quick math there in those scenarios as well.
Beautiful. Okay, good.
All right. Let's see here. Michael, you had a question. Do you have any offer memorandum templates?
Yeah, is that asking about an LOI like Reggie said, or is that supposed to be like a ring memorandum, like a pitch deck?
I think more like a pitch deck, with all the images. So maybe it's the wrong terminology I'm using, but it's, like the ones you usually see in like an Invest Next, where it's like all the graphics. It looks really nice.
Yeah, OM is generally used for selling a property. So you'll hear that term used more for like, hey, pass me the T12, the rent roll, and the OM if you can. But yeah, so we generally just call that investor pitch deck.
So you're asking if we had any templates. We have our pitch decks that we've done before, and some of those are in the drive. We have the Chase Park one that was in there, and I uploaded. Matter of fact,
I think that was just a PDF though, like nothing that's editable, like a template.
We're happy to give you the Google Sheets version. I think we edited the last one in Google Sheets. We can share you that for sure. Whatever we got, it's open to you guys.
Yeah. Obviously, I had to change it up a bunch, but just trying to reverse engineer that today, looking at a bunch of other companies.
Just delete our names and put Michael Hart.
Kind of important.
It's a read only, Michael. It's a read only.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Matt, I know you're the AI wizard. So are there any softwares to help create like super nice PowerPoints? Like, would you just use a PowerPoint, or are there other softwares we can use?
There's some that are built into Google Sheets. Actually, here, I'll show you.
Yeah, well, Matt's looking for that. There's an AI tool called Tome, Tome. And it combines Chat GPT's language processing capabilities with Midjourney's visual capabilities. And you can basically give it, a synopsis of what you want the presentation to be about, and it'll create it instantly. And it looks really good. I've seen a few versions of it, just, some people using it on the fly, and it's pretty impressive.
And you spelled that Tome?
Yeah, Tome.
Sounds pretty cool. So it can create a whole pitch deck essentially just by typing some text.
None of these are perfect, which I'm sure that goes without saying. I've yet to find an AI thing that you don't have to tweak a little bit, but it does save it. Generally, a good AI tool should save you a significant amount of time. And even just really the artistic kind of rendering is really what it really saves a lot of time. Let me see here. Passwords or anything. Pull up. Anyone memorize passwords anymore? Because I sure don't.
Maybe 2.
Yeah, just have 2 different like variations of a password that you use.
I know all the top secret passwords in the military because they were all the same. All right, yeah. So here's one if you're curious. One of the AI tools. You can add it as an extension into Google Slides, but it's called slidesai.io. And so you can go in here and say generate slides. And you can say, hey, like, what are you going for? Let me just whatever. I'll just say, hey, we're an educator and we're whatever here, going even Google. And then from here, you just basically describe what you're trying to make a slideshow about. And then it'll generate the slideshow for you. The more info, the better. The free version only has 350 characters, no, free version has 2,500 characters, I believe, but you can add more. Obviously, the more data, the better. As you go the number of slides, and I don't know. Let's just see. This is going to take too long to create this 350 words.
So I just uploaded our RV park PowerPoint shindig. You can do whatever you want with it. For some reason, some of the like text looks weird, but it didn't when it was finalized. And the text is like not in the box, it's like out of the box, whatever. For the most part, that's our most recent pitch deck that we did for the deal we closed earlier this year.
Process.
That's probably not 350 words now. Anyway, it's going to take me too long. I'm going to try to create one for you real time, but anyways, that's the one slot. So there are plenty of other options for sure.
Sweet.
Even within that one, what I've used it for, it'll the other version of what that tool does. If you have a slideshow already, that's just all bullet points and text. You can have that tool alongside you. It'll read what's on your slide and it'll give you some suggested images to use. And so you can just kind of copy and paste what the suggested images are based on the content of your slide, which helps a little bit as well. I enjoyed just trying to work in all of your faces last week into the slideshow. That's what I did to spend my time with. Have April next time.
We could also do it the old-fashioned way, just sit down, think, Google, go and take a photo, upload it, put it in,
No, the old-fashioned way is opening up an encyclopedia. You know that, right? And
probably
using a pen and paper. Cool. What else you guys got? Questions? Other deals you guys got rocking you want to talk about? Good news, bad news?
So you guys are creating a new pro forma, right? And so would you be able to, or maybe that's might be what you're doing, but just add that, as we were talking last time about the ability to really add the construction portion into the financing. We discussed this last time, and I know we can do it as a second position loan, but if there's a integrated way to do it, because I played a bit with it and it's not ideal with the second position loan. I mean, that would be awesome. And maybe also, I mean, that might complicate things, but if there was the ability to decompose month by month for the first few years, Because for example, when you're doing construction, not having the ability to see all the P&L month by month is a bit limiting.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you guys think about that, but that could be
I agree. I
useful.
think that functionality would be really useful because if you can say, hey, I'm planning on drawing 20,000 a month for the first 4 months and then $40,000 a month for the next 8 months, and then income starts coming at month 6, and you can kind of see a little bit better of a granular data. Reggie's the most current where we stand. I mean, Reggie's the mastermind behind it right now. I don't know if that's something you planned on incorporating right now, Reggie, or if that's beyond the scope at this point. What do you think?
No, I love to hear suggestions like this because, I want to build a tool that's useful and applies to a broad range of scenarios. And, functionality like that, I've come to think would be useful. And so I would like to incorporate that element into the analyzer. It's still in its infancy and a lot of work has to be done, but I think that's something that we would like to build into it. Because I'm a big fan of the month to month. These 5-year, 10-year pro formas are great, but the devil's in the details, and sometimes the month to month is where the magic happens or not. And for the year you might be good, but maybe there's a couple of months where you're cash short, and you kind of have to plan for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
And honestly, I truly hate looking past year 3. I mean, year 5, I'm like, okay, but like I had a solar salesman come up the other day and he tried to sell me that in the next 40 years, I'm going to save $1 bazillion by year 40. I'm like, bro, like, no, like, because his assumptions are like, hey, if you assume utility is going to go up by 8% per year, you're going to be paying $3,000 a month in electricity. I'm like, okay, like, cool, man. But no, I don't think it's tactic. So it's just that you'll see the same thing in the syndication space though. People are like, all right, you're not going to get any, we're not going to have any disbursements, but in year 10, when we sell this thing, it's going to be great. You're going to get triple your money. You're like, oh, I know, bro. I don't like that. I need quicker returns. Me personally, that's the way I think.
Yeah, the further out you go, the more conservative you have to be, because the error bars each year get larger and larger. And before you know it, COVID threw a monkey wrench into things that nobody could have ever predicted. There are financial crises, bank crises. Nobody could have saw interest rates doing what they're doing. So there's all these unplanned scenarios that if you have the proper working capital and you've done very conservative underwriting, you can at least weather the storms when they happen. But just don't put too much stock in anything, like Matt said, past year 3, because if you treat that as the gospel, then you could get yourself into trouble making decisions based on it.
Yeah, I used to be like, I think Matt, the first time you ever said that, the analogy that you used was COVID, and this was like it's like early 2022. You're like, I don't like to go out past 3 years, man. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't want to do it. I'm like, I was like trying to think of an argument to that. Like, I don't know what that is. And then your argument was like, dude, just think about 3 years ago. Where were we? I'm like, well, COVID wasn't a thing. He said, exactly. So much has changed in 3 years. So I agree.
Well, what else, guys? 10 more minutes. It's your time. We got you. You got
Actually,
us. Go, Michael.
Follow to that, because I like to hop on all these other companies like OM calls or investment raising calls, and there's a company, and all they do, their whole model is they want to sit on properties no longer than 3 years. That's all they do. And I thought that was kind of interesting that they don't ever, do anything into perpetuity. Have you guys ever done any properties where that was the sole goal? I guess I'm trying to figure out the numbers of why they do that model. I think they charge like much bigger acquisition fees for sure, but seems just a little weird, a little different.
Generally, as a syndicator, those type of syndicators, you get paid on the acquisition fee, but the big payday is when you flip the property, you sell it. So when we sold Citronelle, that was a 2-year hold, roughly. I can't remember, roughly 2 years.
16 months.
16 months. And then we're prepping Brixton to sell as well, because our first 2 acquisitions were all planned for your traditional kind of model of buy, refi mid-year, and then sell. Like that was our plan for the first couple, until we realized like it's a lot of work to freaking find the right property, syndicate it, get it, And then you got to asset manage it. And it's not just asset management. If it's a property you're turning, it's a significant project management portion. Then you got to fire people because they suck, and then hire people and then fire them and find somebody else you got to fire. And then you got to do, it's just like it is. And then finally you get to the point where you're like, oh, and then you're like, oh crap, we got to get ready to sell. And now you're like getting ready to sell. And then you finally sell it. And then you got to deal with the capital gains. And then you got to deal with the disbursements. And then you got to deal with a year or two after you sell, you're still dealing with like the ramifications of that sale, whether it be CPA or tax filings or investors reaching out for documents. It's just like, it's such a churn and burn, man. I just don't like that concept. But there is significant payday, just like in flipping single family houses. Why do people do it? Because there's big money in it, but it is a lot of work, you know. So if you built the model around it, I'm not saying it's a bad model by any means. It's just not a model that I want to do. I want to build. I'm not the house flipper, right? I'm the buy and hold investor, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to buy and hold.
Cool.
With scale.
With scale, yes, as much scale as possible. Profitable scale would be preferred.
I don't want negative scale.
We lost $3 million last month. No, we didn't, but that would be terrible.
I think Josh knows money you did. Poor guy. Oh wait, no, it's not Josh. Never mind. It was that. But I think we were in that conversation.
Yeah.
I've already said too much.
Hey, Matt, I mentioned this earlier. If you all could go over the pitch, not the pitch deck, because I'm downloading that now, the one you guys just uploaded, but I guess the pro forma for the mobile home park, because obviously you're not really doing a lot of remodeling on an RV park. You might, do a build out of, wash and dryer area and stuff of that sorts. Do you have any information on that one? Or do I pretty much still do the same thing and just not include that same capital raise as much?
I think you could still use the analyzer we've been using for mobile home park. You just tweak the numbers, and if you don't have a massive CapEx budget, then yeah, you just
same thing.
Don't add that in there.
Okay.
What I did initially, just to give you an idea, Paul, I built this out just as the initial WAG, and then it just kind of grew into something we kind of used. But I started going down cell by cell, just kind of like what Reggie does. Reggie and I are very the same mind when we kind of build things in that regard. But I was like, all right, well, how many pads do we think you can get? What are the lot rents? And then I'm a big fan of just highlighting the cells. So if anyone touches my stuff, they only mess with the ones that are highlighted. That way, less issues of me having to review crap. And then, yeah, so this is the one that I built out. Just so basically to get to the NOI, which is all, again, ultimately, what do we think the NOI we can get to? What does a debt service look like? What type of reserves are we throwing in there? And then what does the cash flow look like pre-refi, right? And so I kind of built that out.
What kind of reserve amount do you have? And then what kind of vacancy or do you forecast usually on that?
So this one was a 45% total operating expense ratio in vacancy. So we expect around a 30% actual expense ratio, and that's going to be at around a 15% vacancy ratio that we're cooking in that. These are my yeah.
So 30% vacancy,
30% expense ratio.
Expense ratio.
And then a 15% vacancy total. That's economic and physical. We don't expect a ton of economic vacancy in an RV park. It's not like it's not as much of a factor. It's physical vacancy is going to be the bigger factor in the RV park, not really economic vacancy.
What were some of the things that were missing from this analyzer? I remember we were going through it and we were like, man, this ain't adding up. And then we're like, oh, it's because this isn't in here. But I don't remember what our
this evolved for sure. Like this started with just, like 12 cells. It's never intended to be like the bigger the analyzer that it was, but it slowly evolved to be more than it was. I wanted to know if we get this thing up and running based on our current debt servicing, what does the cash flow look like? So even if we don't refinance, what does the cash flow look like? So that's where I broke it down here. So I was like, okay, cash flow looks good with these assumptions. And then from there, it was like, okay, what does the cash flow look like once we split it, right? So if we have a 7% preferred return and we're getting an 18% total return here, we have 11% to split. And what does that look like? And so from the GP side, it looks like, you know, if we hit our numbers, we're going to be making around $80,000 a year in cash flow to the GPs. And so from there, I said, okay, here's a purchase price. This is how we got a lot of the numbers, baseline numbers. We got our development costs. So I assumed a two-year development time period. We're paying ourselves $2,500 a month in development fees. I have the holding costs that I just kind of estimated at that time as well. And then our baseline development cost of $1 million, which is now, we just got the bill of $1.7 million, way outside the buffer that we anticipated. So that's a discussion that Josh and Reggie and I are having tomorrow about, you know, how are we going to bootstrap it to either get that down, or we might just pay off the debt and go to our lender and get a line of credit to just cover the difference and just build the thing out correctly.
Yeah.
I don't want to say correctly, just build the thing out without having to be so tight watered, I guess. From there, ARV, like this is the big assumption, right? So what is I said ARV just for easy math, but what is the value after we get this thing built out, assuming 8% cap rate? This was a big variable we talked about, like what is an actual realistic cap rate for an RV park? But because we had planned on building it out and paving the roads and making it not class A, but a nice park, we thought 8% was good. Now that we're not paving the roads, this may be a little bit unrealistic. Regardless, we take the same NOI and we got the value. Like, all right, at the end of the day, we should have something that's worth around $4.8 million. And so that's how we got to the value of what we think it's worth. And then from there, this is where the refinance comes in. We said, okay, it's going to be worth $4.8 million. Now, if we're going to refinance at a 70% loan to value, that's going to give us a $3.3 million loan. Total project cost is $2.4 million. So we should be able to cash out around $930,000 with these assumptions. And so anyways, that's kind of how we ran our numbers. So again, keep it as streamlined as possible on all that. I know that not all of that makes sense, but I'm happy to pass this to you, Paul, if you think this is going to be beneficial.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but again, I think what you'll find is the more you look at these, you have to like manually change. It's almost more work sometimes to take somebody else's work,
right,
and change it to be beneficial for you. And I'm happy. Whatever helps you guys, we're here to help you guys out in whatever capacity. If that helps, I'll send that over. Or I'll put out in the group in Slack.
I think it was like principal pay down or interest pay down or something like that was missing from it, that we were like, oh, well, this doesn't even give us an accurate number. So then we just used something else.
Well, I ended up building out like a really detailed pro forma for each phase, and then built like a consolidated one and projected out occupancy for 3 years. And that gave us slightly different numbers than the analyzer. It was a little more granular, but
we can pass both of these to you guys so you can just see kind of the development and the evolution of analyzers if you want.
Yeah, it helps.
Ultimately, you can analyze till you're blue in the face, but execution is where the money's made.
Isn't that the truth?
And Matt, what was the split on that cash out after refi between the GP and the LP? And we're almost past time.
Oh, you're good. You're good. So if it's 930,000, we would get, if we return the member capital, we would get 60% of that.
So it switched to the 60-40 on the refi?
Yeah, because at that point they'd have 100% back, and based on the waterfall, it would go to a 60%. So we would get that times 0.6, which is.
And I mean, that's a specific question. I guess more general, I'm just trying to figure out a way to pitch that to investors because it's a little bit different.
The big pitch to investors is 558,000 is what it would be if we hit those numbers. The pitch to investors is pretty simple. Like, dude, my goal, the only way I get paid is if you get your money back plus your interest, plus your preferred return. And then anything after that, dude, that's golden. Like, you can take that same money and you can go burn that money if you want. I don't care, because that money no longer is in this deal. So you can go do whatever you want with that money. And then from there, you're still making money. Like, show me a deal in the stock market that you can put your money in, take your money out, and you're still making money.
Cash flow from, yeah.
It doesn't exist. Like, I can't think of any other opportunities where you could do that, besides a BRRRR, right? That's effectively what we're doing. We're BRRRing. You can go do this yourself. You can go find a house, renovate it, add value, refinance your money out, and you can have a cash flowing house. Like, that's what a BRRRR strategy is. We're just doing that for you at scale. And the cost of that is that we're going to take a percentage, but the end game goal is you're still getting infinite returns of that money once we get that money back. And then the benefit of that is you can do it again and do it again and do it again. And at the end of the day, you can have your $100,000 back plus your interest, and now you have all this other stuff with cash flow for you. The cash flow is not super strong. From your original investment, your cash flow, they're getting like 3% on their money in perpetuity. You know, you invest 100 grand, they're making roughly 3 grand a year, which isn't huge. But again, when you can do that 2, 3, 4, 10 times, you're now making 30 grand on that money that you can then still reinvest. Go ahead. Sorry, I stepped on you.
No question.
Yeah.
How do you settle on 70%? Like if it's so like, if it's infinite return, why not like 80-20? Or is that like too aggressive?
No, that's a good question. And a lot of that comes down to, we want to make sure we're paying pref. And so like sometimes they need a bigger chunk. It's really honestly what it comes down to is you take as much as you can to still justify the investor's money in the deal. You know what I mean? It justifies the money, the investor's risk. And that's what it comes down to. Like you take it, like in the RV park one, it's a 60-40 split. We're taking 40% of that one. But in our other deals, we've taken 20%. In other deals, we've taken 30% as GP. So
I'm saying just at the refi, like let's say going in 70-30, but then switching to like 80-20.
I see. I think it came down to, I still want to show some sort of appreciative returns to them, and 3% from their original money. I know it's still technically infinite return, but 3% on the backside is still, it's enough that it's still enticing. You know what I mean? If I were to show them 1% return on the backside, like, hey, you invest 100 grand with me, I give you $150,000 back in a couple of years, and you make $500 a year for life. You're like, oh, like that's not as exciting. And so
Why is it 3%?
What's that?
Why is it 3%?
That's kind of how the math works out.
Yeah, I'll just show you.
Yeah, it's kind of inherent in the perpetuity model. So when you return the capital in year 2 or 3 and you invert the cash flows, just like I said, inherently, because of how the numbers work out, it usually comes out to anywhere from 3 to 5%. Now, over time, you would expect that the property puts off more cash. And so you would expect.
Right. But it's really infinite, but it's saying just on the initial investment, that's what you're saying?
Yeah,
correct. So it's infinite because their money has been returned. So anytime you have zero money in something and you're making money on those $0, that's a number divided by 0 is infinity. And so that's why it's considered infinite return, because you have no money left in the deal. So right now, with these numbers assumptions, again, I haven't looked at this in 6 months or 8 months because we transitioned to Reggie's more granular development or analyzer. Right now we're showing 2.46% ROI for their post refi ROI based on their original investment of this 1.7 million, which equates to 7%. What's this actual prep? Whatever that number is. I'm trying to figure where I had it. This times this. So for 1.7, I guess I could just figure it out. So if you were to invest $100,000, it'd be $2,400 a year, $2,500 a year roughly. You'd be making on your money after that. And so like this was part of the discussion. This was definitely part of the discussion of like, what does this look like to an investor who invests 100 grand with it? And we say 100 grand because that's just kind of a nice, easy round number. And it's not unrealistic for most of your investors to invest 100. You're going to have plenty who want to invest 25. Some who want to invest 10. Some who want to invest $1 million. I mean, it all depends, but 100 is just a nice, easy round number to talk to. Does that make sense? So this was a variable in our decision for how much we're going to take after the refinance.
Makes sense.
Cool.
Sweet. It's 8:06 Eastern anyway. So I'll upload the recording of today's call, and shoot, you guys had so many documents you went over. I don't want to upload every single document. What's like the prime documents I should upload from today's call?
The analyzer.
The analyzer. Okay. Is
No
that in like,
poll.
is that in Slack or something?
I will throw them to you in Slack. What I'll do, I'll just we have a bunch of other like random crap. I'll try to clean up the other tabs so you guys don't get like just confounded with random information that's just going to confuse you. And I will throw in my analyzer and Slack if Reggie, if you want to clean up your tab, your side, and just you throw in your more granular one. We're happy to throw this in there for sure. And then they were looking for, Michael was looking for the PDF or the PowerPoint or Google Slides version of a investor pitch deck.
I sent it in the chat
Yeah.
Oh,
for anyone that didn't see it. Before it disappears, go download it. It's our most recent pitch deck.
cool. And we can throw that in the Google Drive as well, so you guys can have all those.
Yeah, it's in there too. I think it's part 11 of raising cash or something like that.
Well, sweet
And,
guys.
and that's in the original, you're talking about in the original Google Drive?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. But I downloaded it already.
All right, everybody. Y'all have a good weekend and we'll reconvene on.
See you Monday. We're gonna go over frequently
Monday.
asked questions. It's gonna be awesome.
No, we have part 2 to go.
Monday, frequently asked questions.
Oh, that's right.
That is part
Frequently asked
2.
questions.
All right, we'll see you guys.
Yeah.